this video, I'm going to be talking about the different factors that go into determining the upload schedule for a certain composer. There are 5 main factors that go into determining the upload schedule. Those are the average amount of time it takes me to transcribe a piece by the composer, the variation in ensemble size in pieces by the composer, breaks from transcription, double and triple transcription, and the discrepancy between the size of the early and late works. So, the average amount of time it takes me to transcribe a piece, this differs a lot from composer to composer. With Mozart, it's 4 days. With Beethoven, I don't really know. Because, I finished his early piano sonatas in less than a week each. But then there are other pieces that take me well over 2 weeks. It varies considerably. The variation in ensemble size. Now, with schedule determination, this mostly applies to the early works. With some composers like Haydn and Bach, they have a lot of big pieces early on in their respective catalogs. And so I can be more certain that my average is sufficient. And with Chopin, 90% of his works are for piano solo, and the other 10% all have piano in the instrumentation. So again, I can be more certain that my average is accurate. And I don't need to add as much of a buffer for Haydn, Bach, and Chopin. With Beethoven and Schubert, on the other hand, the size of the ensemble varies considerably from piece to piece throughout their output. Take, for example, Beethoven. Before his First Symphony, there are 10 pieces for solo, piano solo, 7 pieces for duet, including some violin sonatas, some cello sonatas, a horn sonata, 9 pieces for trio, including string trios and piano trios, 7 pieces for quartet, mostly the 6-string quartets opus 18, but also a piece for piano quartet, 2 pieces for quintet, both the string quintet and the quintet for piano and winds, and 2 orchestral pieces, both piano concertos, as well as a septet. So that's quite a bit of ensemble size variation in Beethoven's early output. And that means that I am much less certain about whether my average is accurate, and so I need to add more buffer for Beethoven. And similar things apply to Schubert as well. Breaks from transcription. Okay, this is an obvious one. There are going to be days where I don't feel like transcribing that particular composer, or life gets in the way of me transcribing pieces, or the wheel just never lands on a particular composer. Double and triple transcription. Oh, and I should say that the breaks in transcription, it raises the amount of buffer time. Okay, double and triple transcription. This is another thing I have to account for. Just as there are going to be days where I'm not transcribing anything by a particular composer, there are also going to be days where I'm transcribing more than one piece by the composer. This has happened a lot with Beethoven, that I will be transcribing, say, a piano sonata, and then later on, the wheel will land on, say, Symphony No. 5 in C minor, or The Creatures of Prometheus, or a march, or whatever. Late work size discrepancy. Okay, for some composers, this is a much bigger factor than others. For Chopin, this isn't that big of a factor at all, because the late piano solo pieces are about the same lengthwise as the early piano solo pieces. But for Beethoven, this is a huge factor, because the tendency is for Beethoven's pieces to get bigger and bigger and bigger as you get to the later works. And his early works are already pretty massive. So, and on top of that, the inflating size tendency of later Beethoven, and I have to account for that. But I felt that transcribing something like the Ninth Symphony early on just wasn't fair, because I would have like one late work and a bunch of early works, and I felt that that's not fair. And yeah, I have to account for pieces like the Ninth Symphony, the C-sharp minor string quartet, Grosse Fuge, the Hammer-Clavier Sonata, and the Opus 111 Piano Sonata in C minor. I have to account for those very large late works. might all be able to be finished within a month. But the late works, like the Ninth Symphony, almost certainly not. And I have to make sure that I add enough buffer to Beethoven to account for that. Now, the ensemble size variation that I mentioned earlier, it not only factors into upload schedule determination, but it also helped me determine where my benchmarks were. In other words, where I'd stop collecting transcription time data. For Haydn, my benchmark is the 20th Symphony in C major. For Bach, it's the BWV 30 cantata. For Beethoven, it's the Opus 20 septet. For Chopin, it's the Opus 23 Ballade No. 1 in G minor. And for Schubert, it's one of his many lieder, D Schatten, which is D50 in his catalog. Now, as to how I decided on those benchmarks, for Haydn, well, I started uploading Mozart when I was around the 13th piece or so, one of his violin sonatas. And I knew that Haydn would be pretty comparable to Mozart in terms of the amount of time it takes me to transcribe a piece, because classical era. And 20 is just an easy number for me to remember. For Bach, I decided on the 30th cantata because I knew I wouldn't need as much Bach as I would Beethoven, but I also knew that the ensemble varies a lot from cantata to cantata, so I would need more data for Bach than I would for Haydn. And 30 is a nice number that's in between what I have for Haydn and what I have for Beethoven. Now, as for why I decided on the Opus 20 septet for Beethoven, this is mainly because I had already started a bit on his First Symphony in C major, Opus 21. And so I decided to have my benchmark be the last piece before the First Symphony, whatever Opus 20 was, and it turns out to be a septet. With Schubert, I figured I would need more data points, and 50 is an easy number to remember. With Beethoven, going from the Opus 1 number 1 piano trio in E flat to the Opus 20 septet gives me 38 pieces. And with Schubert, I went for higher than that because of the fact that there are a lot of shorter pieces in Schubert's output, even as we get into the late Schubert. Now with Chopin, a little more thought went into it, because the easy to remember numbers, like Opus 20, Opus 5, are mostly short piano solo works, and I wanted to make sure that my benchmark for Chopin was one of the larger pieces in his output, so that my average would not be too skewed towards the short works. And so I decided on the Opus 23, Ballade number 1 in G minor. And this talk about benchmarks brings me to another point, which is that I have to use sample averages for upload schedule determination. And this is because of Beethoven. There's just no feasible way that I could wait all the years that it would take for me to go from Opus 1 all the way to his last opus number, Opus 138, and then average that all out. That's just not feasible. So I instead have to use a sample average. And I figured that if I'm going to use a sample average for Beethoven, I might as well make it fair and square and do a sample average for all the other composers. Even if, theoretically, I could feasibly do a full set average, like with Chopin, he wrote under 100 pieces, so theoretically I could feasibly do a full set average for Chopin, but I decided not to, because it wouldn't be fair for me to do that for Chopin if I can't do it for Beethoven. Here is what my current upload schedule looks like for Mozart. You can see that I'm uploading a piece by Mozart every 4 days. Now, as for which composer is going to be the next one added into this schedule, I'm thinking it's going to be Haydn, because I've been taking less time with the Haydn symphonies on average than the Bach cantatas. And then after Haydn, I think the next one is going to be Bach. And then Chopin or Schubert. I don't really know which order those two will be in. And then finally Beethoven. I think Beethoven is going to be the last of the 6 composers that I'm currently transcribing to be added into my schedule. Because of pieces like his first 2 piano concertos that I know are going to take a long time for me to finish. So in the next video, I'm gonna be talking about which composers are on my certain versus uncertain list for each of the eras, and also about a couple eras that I'm uncertain about. So stay tuned for that.